Some people out there have been criticizing Wonder Woman 1984, saying it's a bad movie, but really they're just bad critics. Me, I have a full crit build, so I'm perfect for this. Other critics just look at the surface, but I tear the layers off and delve deep, consensually. Unlike Wonder Woman. Now you might be thinking you need to watch the movie first to avoid spoilers, but don't. Don't watch the movie first. Unlike other lesser movies, this movie is so brilliant that it actually can't be spoiled. In fact, having a discussion about the themes of this movie can actually make it better. So I actually recommend listening to this review in its entirety before watching the movie. The movie starts with Diana competing in an Amazonian game show-esque Olympic event against fully grown adults, fully grown women. Some people have many criticisms with this part, including the fact that in the first movie, her mother kept her from any sort of training. However, this is where the lesser critics get it wrong. You see, Diana wasn't actually in the Olympics. She was just imagining it. Her mother actually kept her locked away in a basement for most of her life, and abused her because she looked too much like her father. These are just her delusional fantasies she created to escape the reality of her own life, and has grown to actually believe. This is intentional. The inconsistencies and the lack of logic are meant to show this is just a little girl's escapist fantasy. They were trying to be obvious with how unrealistic and illogical it is, so people would understand it, without having to dumb it down and explain it to the audience. Then, of course, we get to the second intro scene where Diana is an adult. And yet again, some people criticize it for having two intro scenes, but that's intentional. You see, that's meant to show not the difference in Diana from then and now, but the similarity. Some people think it's meant to show her finally achieving her fantasy in the real world, but no. You see, this is just another of Diana's delusional fantasies. She did eventually escape her mother's basement, being found after her death, surviving in the basement only off her mother's stored boxes of Franzia, and using the empty boxes as a toilet. She does actually have a normal job. Those scenes are real for the most part. And she is actually fairly popular at her office. But because of her early life, she can't really connect, and she actually only wants her fantasy life, which of course isn't possible in the real world. She escapes the mundanity of her life by fantasizing about being a superhero, a magical Amazon warrioress. Some people might be saying, but what about the first movie? That is also a fantasy of hers, that she is an immortal Amazoness, that she has adventures throughout time, that she saves the day, and of course, that she fell in love with an attractive World War I soldier who tragically died in the war. She has formed attachments to fictional characters and can no longer feel any connection to real people. The World War I era and the 80s are also just settings for her fantasy. In actuality, she is likely in modern times working a menial office job. Now, some people wonder, but what about the handsome man and the not entirely consensual love between them? Well, you see, the handsome man was actually just someone who lived near her, whom she began to become attracted to, though she never actually spoke to him, still being too attached to her fictional relationship, which is of course actually a defense mechanism to protect herself from being hurt in real life. Now at some point the man got married, and eventually got into an accident, leaving him in a coma. The man's wife takes care of him in their apartment, but she has to work long hours to pay for what he needs, and really just to pay the rent to keep a roof over their heads. But you see, Diana knows where he lives, and seeing this opening, she runs wild with her fantasies. She imagines herself wishing to bring her lover back, but of course, in explanation for what she's about to do, the stone can't create a new body for him, and so it puts his soul in another man's body. The coma itself isn't mentioned in the movie because Diana is trying to distance herself from reality. So she creates a fantasy of the man coming up to her, and telling her he is her lover, brought back to life. She can now imagine this man as her fictional lover, her fantasy, rather than a real human being. Diana knows the woman's schedule. She knows when she'll be out of the apartment. But in actuality, is just breaking into the apartment, perhaps with a lockpick, or even with just a credit card depending on the door. And of course, when she breaks in, Perhaps she takes a spare key that used to be the man's key, got a copy made, then placed the key back. Now she can enter without drawing too much attention to herself. Now, when Diana has her time with the man's body, she uses him as a human dildo. Or rather, a human sex doll. Even looking at his face, she doesn't see him. So deep are her delusions. This is the first time Diana has ever had sex. The first time she's ever felt this kind of physical contact with another human being. But eventually the fantasies aren't enough for her. As she receives more and more stimulus, or rather stimulates herself more and more with his body, it becomes harder to imagine her lover's face and imagine the words he tells her. Reality starts to break in and ruin her fantasies. Using the man's unmoving body starts to create an animosity in Diana, a loathing for this man. She starts to get rougher with him as he lay unconscious. She begins strangling him while using him. And eventually, unable to stop her, and already in a fragile state, he dies. Diana creates an explanation for why she had to kill her lover, why she couldn't be with him, why he had to go away. She imagines that she had to wish him away to get her powers back, to return to her safe fantasies where she didn't have to worry about his wife catching her. She imagined the wish had taken her powers from her slowly, as it had slowly eroded her warped mental state. The wishes had gotten out of control and threatened to destroy the world, as the reality of the situation had threatened to destroy her own world. And so in wishing away the man, she had returned the world back to normal. She gained her powers back and delved deeper into her delusions. Diana had gone beyond the point of no return, and truly went into her role as Wonder Woman. She imagined seeing the handsome man and talking to him, for the first time ever, as if everything was fine after what she'd done, as if he'd go back to his wife, and that's why she'd never see him again, after wishing away her lover. This movie is actually a brilliant psychological look into the modern woman, really, and I think it's one of the most powerful superhero movies ever made, perhaps even rivaling Spider-Man 3. She imagines herself brought back to the apartment by her lover, but in actuality is actually just breaking but in actuality is just breaking into the but in actuality is just breaking into the apartment. Now, when Diana has her time with the man's body, she uses him as a human dildo. Now you might be thinking you need to watch the movie first to avoid spoilers, but don't. Don't watch the movie